Hi everyone, this is Lydia Bryseth, the manager of Colorin, Colorado, and I'm here with Lori Dodson, a teacher from the suburban areas of Maryland outside of Washington, D.C., who teaches elementary ESOL kids. Welcome, Lori. Thank you so much for being here. It's so cold, and it's right at the beginning of the new year after the holidays, so things have been busy, so we really appreciate you taking the time to fit this into your busy schedule. We're going to be talking today about social-emotional support for immigrant students. And we're going to be hearing a lot about the work that Lori has done as she has become more and more involved in this work for her students. So before we start, we do want to take a moment to thank the National Education Association that has made this series of events possible on Facebook Live. So thank you to the NEA. And we always want to take every opportunity we can to thank our partner, the American Federation of Teachers, for their longtime support of Colorin, Colorado. Thank you so much to the AFT. And before we start, we just want to make the editorial note that we're going to be talking about strategies and ideas that really can support all children, just as so often what we hear is good for ELLs is good for everybody. We're also going to be talking about some considerations that have to do with immigrant students and immigrant students where immigration status is a consideration in particular, whether it's their own or a family member. While we don't take political positions ourselves, we are going to be referring to some resources today that do. And that's because we have found elements in those resources that we think will be helpful to our audience. So these are all strategies that are based in research, best practices, and as you will hear from Lori, have been really effective in helping kids work towards success. So that being said, we want to jump in here with Lori Dotson. And Lori, if you could just get us started on how you became interested in working with English language learners and immigrants, just to kind of get us going.
So I started out as a classroom teacher, and I loved working with my English language learners. So I was very passionate about working with them and differentiating to help them access curriculum. So I decided to become certified, and I went backing up my master's in TESOL.
That's great, because the teacher that we interviewed in our last event was in the same situation. She was a classroom teacher, and she really loved working with her English language learners. And I think it's always important to highlight those cases, because I know a lot of people find that really challenging, but to hear about teachers who loved it so much that they actually became ESOL specialists is really inspiring. And when you became an ELL teacher, did you have a sense of yourself as an advocate or somebody who even was interested in learning more about this kind of work with kids?
Not really. I kind of came onto advocacy. I got interested originally when Maryland was passing its DREAM Act. I didn't know a lot about undocumented students and students from mixed status families, so I went to a meeting sponsored through my local teachers union and started to hear the challenges faced by students. So I decided I wanted to learn a lot more.
That's great. And if you could just tell us a little bit about your students and the population you work with now, just so we can get an overall picture of that.
I'm an elementary school teacher, so I work with the little ones. This year I'm working with second graders and fifth graders, along with some pre-K students. I'm at a school that has 4 full-time ESOL teachers and 1 part-time ESOL teacher, so ESOL is a significant part of our population.
Okay, and your kids in general, what are some of their backgrounds? What are some of their countries of origin, language spoken?
Yeah. It's very diverse, the area I teach in. We have lots of Hispanic children from Central America and South America, but also children from all over the world, from the Middle East, from West Africa, Asia. It's a very diverse school community.
And in terms of their own background, is there, are there refugees, unaccompanied minors? Is it kind of a mix?
Well, with little ones, we don't always know. There's only so much information we can find. So I always assume that those children are in the population that I teach, even if I don't know their backgrounds.
Okay. Well, I guess one way to start is to ask you for some stories or some examples that really kind of got you thinking about these issues in your own classroom.
I guess it started for me as I went to a conference at TESOL, and I heard some dreamers share their testimonials, their stories. They were students who'd already successfully graduated from college. It got me thinking about the challenges these students are facing, and made me think, oh, these students are also in my classroom. So I started reflecting on that. And then we can't ask about immigration status at the public schools, but we have clues that present themselves. So I started listening to students as I built relationships with them. They started to share stories and hints with me that maybe there's something going on at home. I've had little children who shared fear of police officers. I was one little kindergartner in particular who we were studying the gingerbread man, and all of a sudden she started to tell me how the gingerbread man is in trouble and his mom is going to get arrested by the police. And it started to open my eyes. Maybe this family has fear of police and maybe ICE agents coming. And her older brother filled me in that they were told that they are never to do anything bad because the police can never come to their house.
And I think for young children in particular, it's really, I think people can be at a loss for what to say in those moments and what to do in those situations. Do you have ideas or suggestion? What is your response to a child presenting these behaviors?
I think part of what we do is we reflect as an educator. I reflect on Maslow a lot in making that safe school environment for children and having school be a safe, welcoming place for them to come where they feel cared about, where they have caring adults who are listening to them. Because even though I can't solve their problems, I can be there to listen and check in and build relationships with the family to welcome them to the school building, and also refer them to counselors when it arises, to an ESOL counselor, to start referring to community resources. We work with local food banks to help children have food for weekends, to know that they're healthy and having the food they need to learn. And once kids have their basic needs, then we can move on to do they feel safe at school? Do they have healthy relationships? High self-esteem?
And for younger kids as well, they don't necessarily have a sense of what immigration status is or is not, but they maybe know that something is going on at home that's their grown-ups seem to be worried about. Has that typically been your experience?
Yeah, I've heard stories of that. There are children who come in who you check in with them warmly and you ask how you're doing, how is your family, and they might say something, I'm worried about a relative. I have a relative who's walking. Do you know what that means? And when you share that, yes, you understand, they feel very relieved that you know what this means to them. And later on, checking in with them. Oh, how is your family doing? How's your relatives doing? And then them letting you know that they're safely here. Just that sense of relief that someone cares about me and is learning about me.
Well, I think this is a good time to mention the new book you've been working on, which I'm going to has just come out and has just been printed, and this is from Teachers College Press, and it's called Teachers as Allies. And you are a co-editor along with Anne-Marie Forster-Liu, whom we had a pleasure to interview a few months ago, and you also have a chapter in here, but could you just tell us a little bit about how the book came about?
The book came about through a George Mason University professor, Shelley Wong and Eliza Gosnell, and they were interested in dreamers. They heard some testimonials shared by dreamers and wanted to help educators work with this population. And we noticed that there wasn't a resource out there for teachers. There's a lot of student stories published, there's a lot of research published by university professors, but nothing by teachers for teachers on how to work with this population. So we sent out a call for proposals, and we had a lot of friends and colleagues send in ideas for chapters.
And can you tell us a little bit about some of the kinds of chapters that appear in the book?
So we have chapters that help, starting off with a dilemma approach. So we know that as teachers, dilemmas arise, like my friend who didn't have a bed to sleep in, or sometimes maybe a parent that's hard to get in contact with. So really slowing down the process and reflecting on why is there a dilemma. This approach was developed by two professors, Sylvia Sanchez and Ava Thorpe, and with their university students, they had them look at different perspectives and slow down and consider maybe why is this a dilemma to them and not to another person, and also to consider your own cultural lens when dealing with a dilemma. Maybe as an American, I grew up knowing that parent-teacher conferences were really important, but a parent might, from a different culture, not know what a parent-teacher conference is. So slowing down and not blaming the family, instead educating them so that they can come into the school and feel welcomed.
One of the, you mentioned Ava Thorpe, and in the chapter she wrote, one of the things that I found interesting was that it seems like one of the impacts of behavior can lead to special education referrals where a child's behavior change or it sort of comes out in a different way. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, that sometimes schools notice a problem with a child, they start to act out or they're academically slipping, and they immediately think about special education, when it could be something else affecting them. There could be a traumatic event in the family involving immigration status, or maybe a parent losing a job, or a new sibling coming, or being reunified with the family. So really just slowing down and investigating and learning about the family and using that dilemmas approach to see what's going on and really building relationships with the family before you make a referral.
And that's so important to really be thinking about, as you said, problem solving. And I know you like to emphasize with families, not for families, having them all to be part of the process so that you are working on this together. And rather than coming in with what you think the problem probably is and what the solution probably should be, really, as you said, slow down and let's dig into this a little bit more deeply, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have a chapter in here with Anne Marie. Can you tell me a little bit about what your chapter's about and what you both set out to do through this chapter?
So we wrote a call to action, and we really want to help teachers become involved through the choices they make. As teachers, we have a lot of power in our curricular choices on how we teach. So really setting up that safe environment for children and bringing children's lives into the curriculum through our choices. I know I've used the resources on Colorin, Colorado to find a book list of books that reflect my students' culture so that they can see themselves in the text. When we were learning about civil rights, I used the book Separate is Never Equal, and my children were just intrigued by it. They loved making connections between the book and seeing how like a Hispanic student helped change schools and helped desegregate schools. And that led to one of my Chinese students asking, well, what about me? Where would I fall in the civil rights movement? So I was able to go a step further with him and do some research on my own. I actually contacted Shelley Wong, the co-editor, and she shared her family's testimonial with me of discrimination they faced in the 1950s in Los Angeles. And his mom came up to me afterwards, so appreciative that I took time to do the research and bring their culture into the curriculum so he could make that connection.
And you know, you're talking about really classroom-oriented, focused activities. That this is part of the social-emotional support of immigrants, is allowing them to sort of see themselves and participate in the curriculum through what they're doing in the classroom, as well as getting support for everything else that's happening outside of it, right? But also having this chance to really sort of be more self-realized within the classroom and kind of take that then to the next level. What are some other resources or ideas that have helped you as you're figuring out how to make these connections in the curriculum?
I think thinking about how to be culturally responsive and how to access students' deeper culture to not just holidays, teaching about holidays and heroes, but also what do families value? Because when you value the family, you're valuing the child. So giving a chance for children to talk about their families and write about their families, and what do their families value? Do they value respect? Do they value time with elders? And make those connections. Another thing I learned, especially from Dr. Duvall, who wrote a chapter in our book, is about having children see themselves in the curriculum and finding those stories that aren't always shared and bringing them in. I know right now I have a group of children who I've been working on giving a positive message of being an immigrant. And when they were studying the American Revolution, we were reading about Alexander Hamilton, and we did it from an immigrant perspective, and that he came here as an immigrant. And one of the little girls at the end of the unit made the connection, you know, some people say that immigrants aren't helping America, but look at the difference he made. George Washington might never have won the Revolutionary War without his help. So immigrants are contributing to American society.
I don't know all the lyrics to Hamilton, but I have heard the line, immigrants, we get the job done, and I think that sort of speaks to that spirit for sure. I know that in your chapter you have a chart that you call realities and responses, I believe.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
So as a teacher, we don't know the status of our children, especially if we work with little ones who really don't know how immigration is impacting their lives directly yet. But there's a lot of clues that teachers can look for, whether it's a child who tells you they're sleeping on the floor or is hungry, and then what can teachers do to be non-judgmental and to respond, and how to make resources available easily for families. And we want children to, feel safe at school. So what community resources can we partner with? And then we go on to helping children feel safe at school, having bilingual office staff, translated materials, making it easy for children to register for school without a lot of red tape. Also having parent community coordinators to work with the families to make it a welcoming environment.
And how do you respond to people who say, can I ask about immigration status? How can I talk about it? What is the guidance on that particular issue?
So the main guidance is we don't ask. Some states attempted to ask, and there was actually a Dear Colleague letter that was written by the Department of Justice and the Department of Education reminding schools that children can be educated regardless of their immigration status. So we don't ask it, and we try to make registration as easy as possible. You don't need a Social Security card to register to enroll in school. So really making a wide variety of resources available for kids to register.
And that legally schools should not be asking.
They should not be.
Anything that has to do with immigration status. For our audience, we do have a list of resources and a video interview as well that addresses this issue, and it goes through kind of by document type, birth certificate, Social Security, free and reduced lunch, all of these different considerations, and it helps explain kind of what the legal rules are. But the main rule that people should know is that they shouldn't be asking immigration status, right?
They shouldn't, because it gives fear in the community. In Arizona, when it was asked, children stopped coming to school, and they saw a big reduction of school attendance rates. So it makes parents scared and makes school not a safe, welcoming environment.
And it doesn't have an impact because the children have the right to the free public education regardless, so it's not needed for anything in particular. And I think some places have even stopped asking things like country of origin and other information that they don't really need. They did it as practice, but then they realized this all sort of created this culture of fear during the registration process, so that has been important. I just want to take 1 minute to welcome everyone who's joining us. I'm Lydia Bryseth, the manager of Colorin, Colorado, here with Lori Dotson, elementary teacher from Maryland who works with English language learners. And Lori, one question I wanted to ask you about our friend Karen Nemeth has a comment here where she says, I've heard you use the word time several times and the idea of slowing down. I see that planning for this time and planning to allow teachers to make those choices really falls on the shoulders of administrators, and that the administrators can read the book too. So I think this idea that yes, it's important for teachers to make time and slow down, but if they don't have the time and they're feeling pressured, they may not feel like they can take as much time as they need to. How do you respond to that?
I think part of it is finding people who you trust to help discuss these issues with. So it might be a trusted colleague. Sylvia Sanchez and Ava Thorpe talk about getting a dilemma buddy to partner with, where you can really just make time once a week, maybe for 20 minutes, to sit down and talk about what's going on in your classroom. Maybe what's the perspective of someone else with this issue, or even just to jot down, keep a little journal and jot down a couple things you noticed every day to make it part of your routine so that it doesn't feel like a burden. It's just best practice of what you do.
And I think one strategy we've heard about is then taking examples of success to administrators and saying, when we had a chance to work together, here's what we were able to do, here was the result, so that you can maybe begin to start impacting the culture in your building as well, and opening the eyes. I think, in terms of what people do or don't know about immigration status or clues, what we have heard in particular over the past, say, 15 months or so, is that a lot of teachers and administrators really don't realize how these issues are affecting their families, and they kind of know it's happening, but they may realize that it's affecting a few families. They are often surprised when they find out the scale to which these issues are bubbling up in the community. And it may be the ESOL teacher who knows that, or it may be that they hold an information session and a lot more families come than expected. But I think, you know, what are some steps that educators can take to sort of work within their own community as they start becoming allies and advocates within their own school community?
I think it all starts with relationships. The relationship you have with your students and your colleague and even your administrator. I know one of the administrators I used to work with, we had a situation where we really just didn't know what was going on in our community. We went to pick up a child's family for a school meeting, and we realized they had no furniture. So we decided to take time in our schedule that summer to do home visits and really get to know the families we worked with. And we did social calls just to get to know them better. And afterwards, the families treated us differently. They would come to us with more issues they were having, with more questions. They really viewed us as partners and allies who could advocate with them. I think it's also helping families through personal invitations sometimes, especially if culturally they don't know what an event is or why it's important. So taking the time to call them and explain what this event is helps you partner with the family, because then they realize, oh, this is something important in American culture. I should come and attend this. And having the school I work at right now, we're very lucky to have a parent coordinator who's able to do a lot of reaching out to families. And also they've started parent groups, so parents are running the group so they can talk about issues that are important to them and self-advocate.
Oh, that's very exciting to hear. Saul Ramos Espola says, thank you, Lori, for your advocacy and doing much for our students. You're an inspiration and an amazing role model. Congratulations. So it sounds like we're getting some good examples out there. One of the resources that I know you like to use is the NEA Advocacy Guide, which we have on Colorin, Colorado as well. Could you just tell us a little bit about it and how you like to use it?
Sure. I have done some trainings, co-facilitated some trainings for NEA about the Advocacy Guide. And what I really like about it is it gives not only why it's morally right to advocate for students, but why it's legally right, including for undocumented students. It has the precedent law case Plyler v. Doe. So if someone is questioning, well, why are these students in school, you can say, well, the law states that it would be devastating for children not to have an education. So able to legally say why we do what we do, along with morally why we're doing it. It also, kind of similar to the dilemmas approach, slows down the process and has you think about who are your allies and who can you partner with and who are your outlets of change. I know Anne Marie and I, we used it to help us prepare a presentation once on community resources in the DC area to support immigrant families, and really examining, well, who is in this area that's unique that we can ally with and partner with to help families. If you have counselors available, they're a great resource. A lot of them know of other organizations, so starting out with people in your building, also looking for immigrant groups. I know organizations like Catholic Charities does a lot of work with immigrants, and they're spread throughout the United States, and finding those local organizations that people go to when they need help. Or in Maryland, we have Casa de Maryland, who works a lot with immigrant families. So partnering with those organizations and getting to know your community and what's out there.
And you as an ESOL specialist, what does that look like for you kind of on a regular basis in terms of the relationships and connections that you're making?
I think for me, it starts with my students, getting to know them and having them want to come to ESOL and knowing about their lives and their families and their cultures and what they value as individuals, and then starting to build the relationships with their parents. Because once you have good relationships, clues come. They share stories with you. They share successes and struggles. They share their joys, along with things that maybe are worrying them. So starting with that relationship and then building relationships with colleagues too. So when they notice something, they're open to hearing, well, maybe this family is doing this because of this. Maybe there's a cultural disconnect and having that good relationship so you're viewed as an expert when it comes to solving problems.
And I know that one thing we've talked about is that one of your goals is for the children themselves to start becoming leaders, advocates for themselves, right?
Yes, because we know that eventually, especially our children who are undocumented or from mixed status families, they'll need to advocate for their own rights. So really building up their leadership capacity and having them view themselves as a leader. And in elementary school, it could be as simple as having, a child buddy up and be a buddy reader of a younger kid and have them, oh, I'm the leader in this, I'm helping this child, and giving them responsibilities so they could advocate. Or if there's something in their classroom that goes wrong, you could easily, as the teacher, the ESOL teacher, let their classroom teacher know, but have that child tell the teacher, maybe my name was misspelled or mispronounced, or maybe I need this resource, I need an extra pencil or an extra day to do an assignment, or I need an extra permission slip form. So building up their capacity to advocate for themselves.
That reminds me that one topic that also comes up a lot is sibling relationships and how kids are looking out for each other, both younger and older, right? So the younger ones may be worried about the older ones, and the older ones may in fact be having a lot of responsibility for their younger ones. What are some examples or stories that you've seen in terms of those sibling relationships?
I see one child I think of all the time just told me on how encouraging his sibling was. That, our family came here for you to do well at school. It's really important for you to work hard. It's really important that you are always trying your best. And just that encouragement from within the family and the love within the family for each other.
It's really amazing role models too. And this issue of dreamers and DACA, there really are some pretty dramatic implications for younger children as well. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Most of the students I work with, some are aware of their immigration status. I've had in my career a couple children tell me their status. A lot of kids, once they get to know you, they might share their border crossing story with you, but they don't really know the implications of that. And many young people don't know until they either want to get a driver's license or apply for college. So really looking out for these little ones and knowing that there's going to be struggles ahead for them, and that they need to be resilient and have that high self-esteem and self-worth, so that when they face these struggles, when they get into high school and want to go on to college, which is something we talk a lot about in the young grades. My school has a college chant we do every morning to show the importance of college, and kids are always telling me, oh, well, when I get to this grade, I'll be getting ready for college. So really prepping them so that they can self-advocate. So when policies affect them personally, they can overcome the struggle. One researcher I like, William Perez, talks about how school is a buffer zone, and in elementary school and middle school and high school, how we create that safe environment for children to succeed and thrive, and we protect them from the consequences of status.
And so these are the kids who in the future may be dreamers, depending on what the situation is by then. And then we have the kids now who may be children of dreamers, or who may be siblings of dreamers, right? And who have family connected, and we've used this term a couple times, mixed status, referring to children where at least where it's a mix of people who are documented and undocumented, and it's a very common situation to have children who are U.S. citizens who were born here and parents who are undocumented or one parent. So that these potentially have very immediate consequences on kids who are in schools right now, as well as teachers. Right, and I can't remember the number I saw this morning, but there, some groups estimate that there are thousands of teachers working with DACA in schools.
It's, I think, estimated to be 20,000 right now, that these are our friends and neighbors, that they're in our communities and contributing.
Right, so there are potentially very immediate consequences right now, as well as in the future, for how this plays out with children being aware of what's happening with their families and not. Another question I wanted to ask you about clubs, extracurricular activities. These can really be important for kids, particularly immigrant kids. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. A lot of the studies I've read, children who've successfully gone on to college who are without papers, they reflect on how they were always involved in extracurricular activities. So really reaching out to these children and how these activities made them feel part of the school community and feel like they were welcome and belonged and an important fabric of the school. So reaching out to these children so they can participate and thinking of issues of transportation and cost that might be barriers for preventing them to participate, but encouraging and finding ways that kids can go.
And our friend Karen Nemeth also wanted to ask about the fact that a lot of young children, when they're really little, they won't have those extracurriculars, and they're really depending on kind of their family and impacted by their family situation. What have you seen in terms of really young children?
I think with really young ones is that shared school experience. So maybe even though they can't stay after school for an extracurricular, we're bringing things into them. Maybe it's a fire truck visit coming to the school. It's an experience. Maybe they're building gingerbread houses together. They're learning the Pledge of Allegiance together at school. And it's those shared early childhood experiences that even as adults we reflect back on and smile about and remember.
Sure. Our friend Giselle from the AFT wanted us to talk about holidays, and that some immigrant families may be celebrating holidays that the rest of the school isn't quite as focused on, but it may be a bigger celebration. So she was saying, for example, Three Kings Day tomorrow, which is a big holiday, particularly for a lot of different families and in Puerto Rico. And so she mentioned the example that there are certain schools that are doing celebrations for this tomorrow. Getting back to this idea of showing that you value kids' culture and their experiences. Are there other examples you've seen in your schools of kind of going above and beyond to really welcome families' culture and their traditions and their holidays in the school fabric?
I know that I've worked with schools of high Ethiopian populations, and they celebrate the Orthodox Christmas. So really being open to those children and letting them talk about their culture and what their family does to celebrate. I've had one little girl in particular used to tell me stories of how they go to church and they spend the whole evening at church, and just that pride in someone asking about it and showing interest. So I think bringing in family members to share too is a great way to introduce culture, and bringing parents so that their voice is important and it's heard in the school and the community.
In terms of teachers who are sort of taking these steps, they're getting to know their allies, they're working more, but maybe they're still a little concerned about what is their role, what are they allowed to do, supposed to do. What advice do you have for teachers who are just like starting to navigate these waters?
One thing I learned from participating in NEA events and in TESOL events is as teachers we have our in-school voice and we have our out-of-school voice. And in school we're sometimes limited on what we can say and what we can do, but out of school we have a lot of power to advocate, and we have our First Amendment right to advocate. So you can start partnering with local events. I know I've participated in TESOL advocacy summits where you get to go and learn about federal policies influencing English language learners and actually go to Capitol Hill and advocate. NEA has great resources. They started micro-credentials, including 2 on advocacy, that you can go and walk yourself through the process. And it's about getting the school administrators involved too in advocating with and for students. I think it's being creative and looking for those resources and remembering that we have that First Amendment right that doesn't end just because we decided to become teachers.
And how have you balanced the time and the energy that you've spent on this with the time and energy that you need to really be effective and energetic in your classroom?
I just see it as all interconnected, that when I advocate for children, I'm helping them succeed. So it could be advocating for English language strategies to be used, whether it's teachers bringing in realia or sentence frames, or it could be advocating outside of the school day on issues of immigration and finding colleagues who share that same interest and the same passion as me, and surrounding myself with people who have the same concerns, because I think you're stronger together.
Mm-hmm. Becky Dodson here says, when you value the family, you value the child. Beautifully said. You were very inspirational. And Karen is following along, and she really likes the experiences that you shared, like the fire truck. She said, I've also seen schools that offer extracurriculars for families, like a gardening club, a science exploration club, family sports days for family and child together, so that the family's included, and the school is kind of taking the initiative to kind of get everybody working together, which is great. You mentioned that you've done some other advocacy activities like TESOL, and also you've given some different presentations. What are some of the topics that you've been sharing?
We work a lot on having students be seen within the curriculum and those curricular choices that teachers can make to bring student issues the students value into the curriculum, whether it's talking about immigration beyond just a European perspective and bringing in why people come more broadly, or teaching on the U.S. boundary. How did the Mexican border become where it is today? And why do some people live in America who originally were from Mexico because the border crossed over them? So really finding those stories and getting to know your kids so that you can bring their lives into the classroom. There's a great resource out there, Authors in the Classroom, which really has children write about their families, and they do a whole unit on objects and getting students to pick an object that's important to them, nice. And then write how does it reflect their family's values.
That's a beautiful idea. Sarah Rosa Gallen says, hi Lori, wonderful advocacy work you're providing. In addition to participating in after-school programming, high-achieving immigrants also describe how important a mentor or trusted adult can be in contributing to their success. You exemplify this. Thank you for all that you are doing. Could you speak a little bit more about that mentor, that adult relationship that can really make a difference for kids?
I think it makes a difference for kids and teachers. I think as an educator, you find your mentors who you trust and that inspires you to help kids. So finding people who you can go to when you have a dilemma and talk to, and who you can learn from and trust. And then that translates to building relationships with children and working through problems that are posed in celebrations, and just always being there for them and showing that you authentically care.
And who has been a mentor? If you don't want to say by name, that's okay, but what's been a mentorship relationship that's been helpful to you?
For me, my co-authors for the book. I've learned so much from working with them of different strategies and researchers and best practices, and just knowing that I have this great group of educators out there who, whenever I have a question, I can go to and ask them.
And returning back to the book, what are some ways that you're going to be sharing it or promoting it or getting the word out about it to other educators?
We're going to be doing a book launch at George Mason University on February 2nd. And we're also promoting it at different conferences. We're going to TESOL this year to talk and do a panel discussion with different authors of different chapters.
That's good. I think our audience will be glad to hear that, and to make a note of it, for so many of them will be attending TESOL and can seek that out. That's really great. Well, we're just about out of time, but I wondered, was there anything else that you wanted to add or highlight in terms of your experience?
I think just the importance that I've learned since I started working with this population of students is the diversity of stories. That there's so many different reasons why people immigrate to the U.S., and that there's so many different cultures that are being affected. That sometimes when we think of Dreamers, we think of only Hispanic students, but knowing there's such a variety of reasons why people come, and they come from all over the world, and learning just about how people are contributing back to society. That there's so many myths out there, and just hearing those counter stories to the myths, like you don't pay taxes. Well, people, every time they make a purchase, are paying taxes that go towards our local schools and our roads and firefighters and community resources. And then just the importance of family. A lot of dreamers talk about how their family supported them and helped them and how much they care about their families, and they wouldn't be who they are today without their families.
And we should say that the book does include a lot that has to do with supporting older dreamers, high school activities, arts, college considerations, and sort of looking at the future. So there's definitely a component there that's sort of focused on that target area of young people. Are there any other student examples or stories that you would like to share before we wrap up?
I think just getting to know the families. This is not a student I worked with, but if you ever have a chance to go and listen to student testimonials and hear about the struggles and the joys of they overcame to go to college, it's just a great opportunity to hear from people and learn about the importance of their family and how their family supported them through the process and how they partnered with community organizations to help them. So finding opportunities to read testimonials and to hear testimonials.
And I think always the student story, we have an article about building bridges through storytelling and tips for how impactful a story can be. And it may be the student story told through the student, but it may also be the teacher sharing the personal story. And the woman who wrote it, Laura Grisso, who is an ESOL leader and professional in her district, shares a story of being at an event with a gentleman and getting into a discussion about immigration, and she shared a story that really had an impact on him, and she noticed a shift in their conversation, and she said, it really got me thinking. And then she was later in a situation where she heard students telling their own stories, and she said, it really got me thinking about storytelling. That's something that we can do, and that in particular as ESL, ELL, bilingual professionals, we know these kids, we know their stories, and whether it's to the administrator in our building, the colleague, the community member, we can be in that role. So lifting up the stories, giving students a chance to tell them, but then also stepping forward and telling their stories for them. Perhaps they can't, and perhaps they are afraid to, or perhaps they don't want their name used, but the kind of the humanity of that situation, it seems like really useful. We do have a final comment here which says, I love the fact that you advocate for all students regardless of where they are coming from. Taking the time to get to know the students is a powerful resource to help them succeed academically. I can't wait to read your book. And that comes from Rod Rodriguez, so thank you, Rod, for writing in. So again, the book is Teachers as Allies, and it's from Teachers College Press, and it came out just like 3 weeks ago, and December 17th, I think, was the date I saw. So this is the book, and you will be able to find it from the website. So I think we will be wrapping up for now, but this will be archived on our Facebook page, and we welcome people to continue the conversation. Please keep posting your comments and questions in the archive of this, and it will also be on Colorin, Colorado as a resource. So we want to thank again our partners, the National Education Association, for making this event possible, as well as the American Federation of Teachers, and both organizations are really working very hard in terms of representing not only immigrant students, but immigrant teachers, regardless of their situation, and that's been a real priority for them. So Lori, thank you so much again for coming, sharing all of your expertise with us, and congratulations on the book and all of your great work, and being an inspiration of sort of going from someone who started from scratch and then really making this a new and exciting part of your career. So congratulations and thank you. Thanks to all of you for tuning in, and we'll look forward to seeing you here next time. Bye-bye.